Hey everyone, happy Friday. Your homework due was to read about automatic stabilizers and fiscal policy issues. Your homework is to study for your test next Tuesday. I have posted so many resources on the digital unit overview sheet, so please make use of those resources. Our learning targets for today are to be able to explain what an automatic stabilizer is and how they affect the economy, and two, explain issues with fiscal policy. So let's start with automatic stabilizers. Here's a definition. These are government spending/tax rules that cause fiscal policy to be automatically expansionary as the economy contracts and to be automatically contractionary as the economy expands. So, this is the opposite of discretionary fiscal policy, which we talked about last class, where the government can actively choose to spend or not spend. These are automatic stabilizers. They are already just built in to how our economy functions. And these will dampen the effects of both an expansion and a contraction. So, with automatic stabilizers, the economy's business cycle is going to be less intense in both directions, up and down. So, hence, the economy ends up being more stable. Here's a graph to show you what I mean. So, first, let's start with the black dotted line. This trend line represents potential GDP. Remember that potential GDP is also the same as long run aggregate supply, which over time generally shifts to the right. And so the blue line represents real GDP growth without any automatic stabilizers. So as you can see, the peak is really high, the trough is really low. But then the red line represents real GDP growth with automatic stabilizers present. And so automatic stabilizers are going to smooth out the business cycle so that it's not so intense up and down. Also, here's where I got the source from the Journal of Theoretical and Applied Economics. These people wrote an article titled An Approach of Social Policy in Terms of Macro Stabilization Function. So if any of you end up being PhDs in economics, this is your life in the future. I hope you find it interesting. Okay, so I've got an introductory analogy. Now that we're done with definitions, here's an introductory analogy to help us understand automatic stabilizers. Hey guys, meet my friend, Jenny Williamson. She's a real person and definitely not the result of Mrs. John Googling sad student. As you can see by these photos, she's clearly not doing well in school, so how could we help her? Well, as her grades drop, her parents and her teachers notice, and so they might give her more attention. Her parents could pay for tutoring, they could force her to study and play less sports, or they could remind her to actually look at the study guide. So, when Jenny is in a recession, and in this case, recession meaning her grades are dropping, right? These automatic rules kick in that make her recession less intense. So, when your grades are dropping, are there things your parents just would automatically do regardless to help you dampen that recession? So, maybe we can make a parallel now between school and the economy. When you're a struggling student, right? Maybe you get more attention from your teacher automatically. I know that I tend to reach out to students when I notice them struggling. It's like an automatic thing I do, and hopefully that reduces the struggle. And the same goes for an unemployed person, where when you are unemployed, you automatically, again, you have to technically apply for it, but it's there, right? Unemployment benefits are rules that kick in that help you reduce the struggle. So basically, when the economy struggles, there are existing rules that cushion the struggle. And the same works in the opposite direction. When the economy is doing great, there are existing rules that dampen the greatness. I don't know how good of an analogy that was. Because the sad student analogy only really works for an economy in a recession. Like, could you imagine if we told kids who had A's that they weren't allowed to study anymore to try to dampen the greatness? Okay, so I guess I couldn't really think of any other analogies to make, so we're going to move on to specific examples of automatic stabilizers. So again, automatic stabilizers are existing rules in our economy. And so we've got taxes and transfers, and we'll start with taxes, and we'll look at two types of taxes, income tax and sales tax. So starting with taxes, let's pretend it's the good times, meaning when actual output is greater than potential output. So we are to the right of long-run aggregate supply. So with income taxes, remember, during the good times, people are employed. Wages tend to be higher. So this is awesome. The economy is booming, it's heating up. So, on the one hand, people have jobs and they have incomes. Yay! But on the other hand, they are paying more in taxes. Nay. And you know from our fiscal policy lesson that increasing taxes is going to be a contractionary policy, right? So income tax is an automatic stabilizer. The government doesn't have to pass a new bill to have an income tax, right? Income tax just exists. It's automatically taken out of your paycheck. Income tax is automatically taken out of your paycheck. So it's a pre-existing fiscal rule that automatically contracts the economy. Again, this is the opposite of discretionary fiscal policy, where the government has to, Congress has to get together and pass bills to make a law. The other type of tax, so we just did income tax. The other type of tax is a sales tax. So during the good times, again, people have jobs. So on the one hand, they can afford to buy more stuff. Yay, that's great. We love shopping. I love shopping. But on the other hand, they're going to then pay more in sales tax. Nay, that sucks. So sales tax is an automatic stabilizer. Again, you buy something, you automatically pay tax on it, right? Congress doesn't have to pass a bill to tax you when you go buy groceries. So these are pre-existing fiscal rules that automatically contract the economy. Side note, some states don't have sales tax, like when you go shopping for clothes. Again, I lived in Minnesota for 2 years when I worked at Target corporate, and it was so great. You could buy clothes and you didn't have to pay tax on it. Okay, let's briefly check your understanding. So during the good times, would there be more or less tax receipts? Shout it out in your head. I feel like Dora the Explorer. Boots, what do you think? There are more tax receipts because higher incomes and more purchases, right? Because people are employed, they're buying stuff, means that there are more tax receipts. Okay, and so basically, again, during the good times, the existence of sales tax and income tax are going to dampen the good times. Here's another way to look at the process. So I've got a flow chart prepared for you. So if we look at taxes during the good times, right, during the good times, GDP is growing. So people's disposable incomes are also growing. This means consumption is growing. We learned a few class periods ago, right, that we learned about the aggregate consumption function, right? And your disposable income influences how much you consume. So as consumption has increased, this leads to more tax receipts. But that is a contractionary policy. Let's look at it in the reverse. Bad times. Oh, so I'd like you to think in your head for a second, and I'll give you the answers on the next slide. So during the bad times, what's happening to GDP? Then what's happening to disposable incomes? Then what's happening to consumption? And what does this mean for tax receipts? Oh, also, I just realized the Dora the Explorer reference doesn't make sense to you guys because it wasn't your class where we watched a video of David Gitchner pretending to be Dora the Explorer for his econ final. In my Gold Day class, I showed parts of David Gitchner's econ final from 2 years ago, and he and Adrian Eisenberg and Dylan Goldstein, Gold something, they put on a show, Dora the Explorer, as part of their econ final. Anyways, okay, let's check your answers on the next slide. Here we go. During the bad times, GDP is falling. So disposable incomes fall because people don't have jobs, people aren't employed, they don't have disposable income. So if you don't have any income, you can't buy stuff. So consumption falls. Therefore, tax receipts decrease. There's less tax. And so that would actually be an expansionary element of our society, of our economy. Okay, let's talk about transfers. So let's first look at the bad times. So transfers are going to kick in when the economy is doing poorly. Transfers kick in when the economy is doing poorly. Again, Congress doesn't have to get together and pass a bill to give people transfers. Okay, again, when I talk about the COVID stimulus package, that was a non-automatic transfer, right? Because Congress had to pass a bill to authorize money to transfer to people. So, what are some examples of automatic stabilizers that are transfers? Well, first one would be unemployment benefits. Another one is Medicaid. Another one are food stamps, right? These are just pre existing programs that already exist for when people are struggling. So let's look at the bad times. During the bad times, GDP is falling, disposable incomes fall. So when people's disposable incomes fall, then transfer payments will kick in automatically, right? Again, Congress doesn't have to pass a new law, right? Like food stamps are a really great example. You have to make like basically if you have a low salary, low wage really, then you qualify for food stamps. And so these transfer payments that kick in then cushion the bad times. So the bad times aren't as bad. Let's look at the good times. GDP is rising. Disposable incomes rise. Yippee. And so no one needs transfer payments because you don't qualify for transfer payments because you're doing awesome. And so the good times are then reined in. Okay, we're done talking about automatic stabilizers, so we're moving on to part 2 of lecture, which is discretionary fiscal policy issues. So there are 2 issues, time lags and crowding out. Time lags are pretty straightforward and easy. So the first type of time lag is recognition lag, where you're like, wait, what's going on with the economy? Because it takes time to recognize what's going on with the economy. So recognition lag. So even though the economy maybe isn't doing great, it takes time to figure out what exactly is wrong with the economy. Okay, so let's say you figured out what's wrong with the economy. Now you got to figure out what you're going to do to fix it. And this is called administration lag, right? It takes time for Congress to stop fighting with each other and pass some bills. If you took AP Gov, actually, you might have talked about this in civics too. Over time, people in Congress have gotten further and further away from each other. There's a lot less moderates in Congress these days. And so people in Congress really don't agree with each other a lot. So it takes time for them to stop fighting, and to pass a bill. The third time lag is called operational lag, where you're like, oh my God, we passed this bill. Why is it not taking effect? Well, once bills are passed, it takes time for it to have an impact. It takes time for money to flow through the economy and take effect. Okay, this is our last topic of the day, crowding out. Hey, look at this really cool photo I have here. We've got this man in the middle. He represents government spending. And government spending is going to crowd out or push aside investment spending and, in general, other interest rate sensitive spending. So, government spending is going to crowd out or push aside investment spending and other interest rate sensitive spending. So, crowding out is when lots of government spending crowds out investment spending and other interest rate sensitive spending. So, here's how crowding out occurs. Part 1. So, let's say the economy is in a recession. Oh no. So, let's say the government decides to respond by using government spending, and they spend a lot of money and they're able to shift aggregate demand to the right. And let's say they finance this through borrowing. Well, when people borrow money, this leads to an increase in the demand for money. This is an increase in the demand for money. As a result, interest rates will rise. If this is confusing, let me explain. Now remember, an interest rate is basically the price of buying money, right? Because if I'm going to borrow money from someone, right, they're going to charge me interest, right? Maybe interest rates are low, 1%, 2%. Then the price of borrowing or buying money is pretty low, whereas an interest rate of 10, 20% is really high. And so that's a high price of obtaining, borrowing, or buying money. If you're still confused, draw a supply and demand graph for money. If the demand for money shifts right, you could see that the price of money rises. Let me show you what it would look like. Right? So with a supply and demand graph for money, instead of price on the y-axis, it's going to be interest rates because that's the price of borrowing money. So P is actually an interest rate. Right? So a big increase in government spending financed by borrowing is going to shift the demand for money to the right, Whoa, notice that interest rates have risen. Okay, now this is part 2. How crowding out occurs, part 2. So again, we know that interest rates have risen. This is going to hurt investment spending, the I component of CIGXN. Remember, the biggest determinant of investment spending is interest rates. We talked about this day 2 or day 1 of this unit. The biggest determinant of investment spending is interest rates. When businesses borrow money, they prefer low interest rates. But if interest rates have risen, that's going to deter or hurt investment spending. So, to summarize, crowding out is a fiscal policy issue because if the government has to massively spend through borrowing, that could drive up the interest rate. And then increased interest rate is going to hurt other sectors of the economy. Ouch. If you don't like how I explained it, or if you're still confused, there are so many resources available to you. Textbook, other teachers on YouTube, your friends. I don't know. Nicole Rogoff told me that there's like AP macro TikToks out there too. Like, don't sit there and be a lump and be like, I don't get it. Look for other resources if I'm not making sense. Or always email me. I'm happy to meet, answer questions. Did you meet the learning targets? Be able to explain what an automatic stabilizer is and how it reigns in the economy. And can you explain issues with fiscal policy? To finish up class, we've got a worksheet. Keys are posted. Please try the worksheet first and then check the answers after trying it. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.